and I work from home as a counselor and an astrologer. Like, I just talk to people online, so I guess I have a lot more time to cook, and I buy my food from like a local organic market, but it's super expensive in the city, so I'm definitely interested in learning how to like grow my own food or something like that, because I don't know anything about that, so that would be something.
Christian, work as a writer and an editor, primarily from home. Do other stuff in town too, but that's primary. Get most of my food from either the farmer's market. I do get a lot of organic from Costco. It's kind of a staple just because it's easy. You can get a large amount when you're a bachelor. That's nice. Just throw it in the Vitamix. I rent. Was there another? I think that's it, right?
Yeah. Cool. You can pass it back up. Oh, yeah. So everyone's getting a sense. You probably heard yourself in someone else's primary living scenario. So there's kind of a pattern to this, is what we're getting at, is that there's a pattern to the way that all of us are living. And so as we create solutions, right, we can be like, hey, what'd you figure out? Because I want to copy you, right? So here's Connor to share his input.
All right. I live in Ojai, which is about an hour south of here. And it's a sweet little community. It's a town of about 8,000 people, and then a greater valley of about 30,000 people, but it's a place where everyone kind of knows each other. So I live on purchased land. It's owned by my family. I also pay rent for another space off-site, and I have been living in community on the farm site. East End Eden is what it's called, and we grow quite a few things. It's hard to say what percentage, but I'll tell you what we do produce. We get about a gallon of fresh goat's milk every morning, half a dozen eggs to 2 dozen eggs, depending on how many chickens we have. We raise chickens for meat also, and pigs seasonally. We have about 1.5 acres of food forest, so all times of the year there's diverse yield coming in from the trees, and consistently planting more and more. Our water comes from a well, which a lot of the design of the farm is actually intended for the rehydration of that aquifer that we're drawing water from. So essentially the landscape as a whole is like a water tank, and the more infiltration and percolation of surface water we sink in, the better. And simultaneously that's helping to grow the food forest. So the food forest catches the water, essentially, that waters the trees and then provides us with drinking water. So and keeping that, so food, water, and then air, kind of one of the things that always is in mind is like, how do we design a system that sequesters carbon so we have cleaner air, right? So everything we do is essentially drawing in CO2 and expressing oxygen back into the atmosphere. And then housing, we have a communal house that was a barn converted into a house. It's a very conventional space. So we're starting to move out of that and build a house with a lot of on-site materials, clay, sand, and straw. And then we cut down eucalyptus trees that were on the property and milled them into lumber. And we're building with on-site materials. And then, so a community of about 6 people right now. We all live on about $20 a week for food budget. So what we don't produce at the farm, so what we don't produce on the farm through the social capital yields of living in a close community like Ojai, we go to the farmer's market on the Sunday, and we know a lot of the growers. Even if they're from out of town, we all kind of meet up on the Sunday at the farmer's market, and we're cool and friends and whatever. So almost every weekend we fill 2 truck beds full of produce that will not make it to the next farmer's market, so they essentially cannot sell it. It's not viable to transport. So it's stuff like lettuce and kale and all kinds of greens and like soft fruits and vegetables. So we literally fill 2 truck beds of produce boxes, or we just dump it all in the truck bed. And so we live on a lot of that food, and then we feed that to our animals as well. So it reduces the feed costs for our animals, which means we don't have to demand the production of grain from other places to bring back and feed to our animals. And then we also source food waste from restaurants. And in doing all of that, we also get like major dumpster scores. So like before the festival, I got a huge trash bag full of like really really good quality chips. They were all like individually packaged. Anyway, we're looking at all these lost yields in our community and finding them, identifying which ones are useful for us, and then that's why we pay $20 a week per person on food. And I know I'm going on and on, but these are, I think, important.
Context, but
Yeah, context.
Well, I could just add a little bit.
Sure.
So basically, back to this ecology thing. Who's heard of biomimicry? Who's familiar with biomimicry, right? So this practice of copying nature, right? To, as a systems approach, right? But even beyond that, when we're recreating our lifestyles to be regenerative, it's not just biomimicry, it's also realizing that we are nature itself. Like, we have ecologies. So as we start shifting our perspective to look at our lifestyle as an ecology and being ecologically minded and doing so, we start seeing the benefits that we can create for ourselves by addressing our relationships with our local network, our local ecology, our local community, with our inputs, our outputs, what we need, what we have to offer. And so, part of what I was saying about bringing Connor up here as the ringer, he's likely living more of a regenerative life than I'm guessing anybody else here. I could be wrong. And not saying that his lifestyle is regenerative, like he might be having a net negative impact or slightly positive. I mean, he's doing a lot of good in the world by sharing all this information, but certainly I'd say that he's living the most regenerative lifestyle of any of us, right? And so when you hear him talk about his lifestyle, his regenerative lifestyle, in comparison with yours, you're seeing the efficiencies that he's creating, right, and its benefit on his outside, landscapes, by some of the lifestyle choices that he's made. So, as you're hearing them, just be thinking of that ecology and start thinking about your lifestyle as an ecology.
Thanks, Eric. It feels weird to hear that, and it's good. It's good feedback, and I feel like just to give a little more context too, I started on the sort of transition when I was 17 years old, discovering permaculture and starting to incorporate it as like a necessary design framework for my lifestyle. And there's so many people who get really excited about permaculture and the efficiencies of patterning off of nature and living this lifestyle where you're producing your needs and your resource supply chain. And all of a sudden because it's so contrasted in our culture and society, it becomes like something that's special, but it's not. It's like, this is like how we've been living for most of the time we've been human beings on Earth, and there's this like recent blip in our human story where we've moved away from that. But it's it's kind of like as soon as you take that step forward and start integrating more, there's like this cascade effect where like the natural patterns of life are conducive to living an efficient and ecologically based lifestyle. I mean, we're biological organisms in a matrix of biology, and so when we find where we fit in that, it's just, it all kind of, I mean, it doesn't all unfold by itself. It obviously takes conscious decision making and effort, but there's a certain point of momentum where it becomes like this really cool thing, and resources start arriving. You know, it's not such a pursuit, and it's more like, wow, I'm seeing resources everywhere, and it's not even like they show up. It's like you can all of a sudden see them for what they are all over the place. You know, so yeah. And then I'll just briefly talk about work and finance. I started working in permaculture design or regenerative design when I was about 19. Now I do consulting work and teach workshops, and it's a pretty good lifestyle. It pays pretty well for the most part. And in fact, I find that now more and more it's hard to even keep up with the amount of demand for consulting and design work and teaching. And, you know, starting rate now, it's like $60 an hour to go to a property. That's a cheap rate for a consultant, but people want that all the time. Now I'm having to like say, I can't do it. I'm going to stay home. So that's work.
So I'd like to bring it back to context for all of our lives, which is really, you know, what are our needs to live a beautiful life, and how are we achieving those needs, right? And so basically, we just heard Connor said that when he goes and works in consultant, right? See, at $60 an hour, right, and his food budget is $20 a week, he needs to work. Do the math, Geisty. An hour for 3 weeks, or basically an hour and 20 minutes for the month. So to pay his food bill, he has to work an hour and 20 minutes every month, right? And so, like going around, so who pays $25 or less a month for food? You're supposed to raise your hand. Who pays $50 or less? A month. Oh, a month. Okay, so, sorry, thank you. So a month, $100 or less a month. That's you. Did you raise your hand? Okay, but on average. $200 or less a month. $300 or less on average. $400, right? $500, right? So we're topping out around $500 a month on food. Or we're right. So, and then based upon your, you know, we don't have to do this exactly, but based upon your income, like how many days are you now working to feed yourself? Right, like you're working days just to put food on the table. And so the magic is that when you know, the whole thing of a penny saved is a penny earned, that's a real deal, right? Like when you're going from having to work 2 days every month just to feed yourself, or 3 days or whatever it is, you know, and all of a sudden you're saving money on food because you're feeding yourself in a more ecological manner, ecological minded, you're providing for yourself at less cost. All of a sudden that's another day a week or a day a month that you don't have to work. And when you don't have to work, you can do whatever you feel like doing, right? Which might be resting, which might have huge value in your life, to get a day every month where you just chill, right? Because I doubt that many of us do it. If people do it, like, thank you, because you're resting for all of us, because not everybody gets to do that or chooses to do that or makes that a priority. Yeah, so especially with food costs and housing costs, those are I feel the two biggest line items in our budgets that prescribe how much work we have to work, you know, to provide for ourselves, our housing, our food. Everyone kind of get the gist of this? Yes? Okay, cool. So we only have like 10 more minutes. So I'd love to kind of check back in with you guys to see if there's any questions relating to a theme. I think we're kind of getting to the overall view of how we can begin to see our lives as a system and begin to make improvements, so we get to do more work that's important in the world, rather than just the 9 to 5 just to pay for the house and the food, right? Everyone kind of getting a sense of this?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So you said there's a recurring pattern in people's lives as far as how people are living their lives and what happens. So what the part of the last talk, you talked about some of the ways that common pattern can be alleviated in some ways. So people who are out there home and traditional 9 to 5 or things that people can do that they take action and they don't have to have a farm experience.
Cool. So we're talking about like how to make this transition. We've kind of identified where we're at. We're seeing our life for the ecology that it is, and we're seeing some, projection of a direction we would like to go, making our lives more fun, more easy, more healthy, more restful. We're expending our energies and our time doing things that we're more in love with, right? Where we're transitioning our jobs to things we actually love doing that are of benefit to the world. So that's kind of the direction we're going. And then what are some nuts and bolts for how we can achieve this? Let's field like 2 more questions. Does anyone have a burning question or a theme that they'd like to be covered in our last 7-8 minutes?
I like sticking with that theme of like how to transition into a more permaculture lifestyle.
Yes. Yeah, favorite tidbits to make that transition, right? Yes.
So the practicality for people who are renting in terms of what is the wisest investment for someone to take.
Yeah, renting. Yeah, so the housing bit, food and housing, critically important, and also community. So I'd just like to touch on the whole thing about like hanging out with smart people who already figured a lot of the shit out. Like those 2 dudes sitting back there, go hang out with those guys because those guys figured a lot of this out, And so look to your community. Like if you see someone who's like super healthy or has their finances dialed or has their housing situation, their food, go learn from the people within your community directly. So Connor, thoughts on transition?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that's maybe less tangible in terms of these sort of tangible things we've been talking about is becoming eco-literate, sort of in getting a context or a lens of perception where you're viewing your life and your interactions through a lens that is based in the patterns of nature. You're seeing with a foundation of ecological literacy, and I think that's one of the major problems that we have as a society is we don't have eco-literacy. We don't understand the cycles of nature, which are also the cycles of life and the overarching patterns of the universe. And if we can't abide by those things, then life is always this kind of hard struggle, and it's a degenerative process that expends more energy than it actually produces over its lifespan, right? So if we can start with a foundation of ecological literacy, then we start finding ways we can plug in with what we like to do and make it fold into itself, like Eric's mentioning, this like sort of positive feedback loop of inspiration and knowledge of how life and nature works coming together. And I think once you get to that point, then these things start to fall into place, and you start seeing the low-hanging fruit and the easy yields and all the places where you can obtain a beneficial yield. And really, I think the best thing that we can do as human beings, because we're not really going to save the planet per se, we need to save ourselves, I think is to become ecologically literate and start understanding that we are nature, we are an expression of nature, and we need to, again, abide by the rules and regulations. I know none of us really like rules and regulations, but there are some that are inescapable, and we've been swimming upstream a long time, and it's time to just kind of turn and flow with it.
Yes, and I think another key point is to acknowledge where we're at. Geisty could probably speak a lot about this, but it's basically the culture that we've all been brought up in was designed not to be ecological. It was designed to essentially separate us all and extract as much as possible. Like like who's at least at some point in their life lived where they totally felt like they were just like